and you're familiar with all this. So good. So again, thank you. And
Yeah.
you know, your office is, you're one of the offices that are known to be fairly active and effective in social media.
Yeah.
So I just want to start. How large of a role would you say social media plays in your office? And when I say social media, the different social media platforms as well as email.
Yeah. I would say that it is the predominant means by which we communicate with folks. And on a daily basis, we will do things on Facebook, Twitter, and through email. Now, the predominance now of communications that come in through email, but we also push information out through the other sources, specifically Twitter and Facebook. We do a little bit on Instagram. Don't do anything yet on Snapchat. Snapchat's, it's so fleeting. It's hard to be able to really figure out what the role is there.
Right. So. You mentioned, and this is going to be one of the questions. You mentioned you push information out, inferring that it's a two-way street, where you use social media to communicate with your constituents, but your constituents also will use it to communicate with you. What would be the ratio on that? Do you see it more as a way to communicate or more of a way to be influenced?
Well, I think both. We use it to communicate, to push information out. We also use it to get information back in. We'll ask questions. We'll say, what are your thoughts on this bill? Recently we asked people, what are their thoughts on the Puerto Rico bill? What do you think we ought to be doing in that area? So it does give us a good sounding platform for how people view public policy. It's not always the legislation itself, it's how people view the issue. And that is helpful to us because it lets us frame how we view then the legislation. Because many times people don't necessarily get into the nuts and bolts of the legislation. Sometimes they know bits and pieces of it, and many times it's what they pick up through other sources. So we try to engage in that dialogue back and forth to get from people that information. And it's interesting too that there on these social media sources, communications by others prompts people to put their comments and ideas up online. So we find that that's a good way too to kind of discover what the temperature of the public is on a particular issue.
Would you say that you're influenced by the opinions via social media, or is it just a way for you, like you said, to get the temperature?
I think we are influenced in some ways. I think you have to be careful about making that your sole source of influence. I think you can get an indication, as I said, you can take the temperature, you can figure out where the passion is on things, you can figure out too what public perception is. And in this realm, perception many times becomes reality. So you have to understand what the perception is, because if you're going to make a decision that is counter to what people are perceiving, then you understand the chore that you have once you vote, that you're going to have to explain to people why you voted, sometimes counter to what the prevailing public opinion is. And sometimes it's not based on correct information. And many times that's tough because there's such a stream of counter information out there to try to push back on that and say, well, no, that's only part of the story, or it's not correct, is the challenge that we have. But we use it to gauge. It is not the sole source with which we predicate our decisions, but it does play a role.
You've been here long enough where you've seen what Congress was like, in the early stages of social media, and where it is now. Have you seen it? Has it been a big change in how Congress operates?
I think it is. I think you see much of the information that gets put out today is done predominantly through social media. You saw it done, I think, initially more as a fad, just to say, hey, we're doing a little bit of this. What's the impact? Today, it is a critical part of a communications plan. Just to put it in perspective, our campaign kickoff, we did a video, we pushed that out over Facebook with a little bit of advertising, a very small amount, and we're up to about 65,000 views now. That is, extraordinarily different than what you would have seen or done years ago. It has become a major part of how you communicate, how you capture the ability to communicate in groups. So it's a way to network. We have a lot of folks that we do our weekly e-newsletter update. So it goes out via email and via Facebook. And the reach that we get with that through all the mechanisms, we send it out on Twitter. That'll link back to both Facebook and to the website. The reach that we get from that is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's in the tens of thousands of what we get each week in putting that update out. So it's become a critical part of what we do, and we interrelate all of those things, including YouTube. You know, we have our own YouTube channel, so we push information out that, and we purchased our own video camera here, so we do our own videos, and we'll do it, you know, outside, inside, just to give people a little bit different viewpoint on things. And it's me talking directly to them, so it's more than just, you know, posting with a picture. There's a video with it, so there's more of an interactive element to it.
You know, one of the things that we study is an agenda setting, the agenda setting theory, and there's different steps within the theories, and there's always a debate within the actual theory itself as to whether or not the media influences elected officials, or if the media influences voters, who in turn push elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some debate now as to whether social media has cut out that middleman. Do you think there's any merit to that?
I think in some instances it can. I think a great case study would be the gun issue now that always seems to come back up whenever there's an act of violence, and to look at how, you know, one side uses it to kind of push an agenda for additional gun control across the spectrum, whether it's background checks, whether it's assault weapons bans, all those kinds of things, to be able to use that instance, to use the emotion with that, and they, you know, push that out on social media. The question then becomes is, you know, what do you do on the other side? The key is I think both sides have gotten pretty good about saying, okay, we're going to be on the offensive on this. So instead of putting out, you know, what's not happening, you put out what is happening. You say, listen, here are the things that we're looking at this. Here are the public policy pieces that we believe in. And at least it allows you to counter the messaging that comes out elsewhere. And I think that's the main battleground where a lot of these things happen, where you're trying to move public opinion, you're at least trying to create your space in the public realm. And today there's a tremendous amount of competition for that space. You know, it used to be the space gainers were few and far between. Newspapers, television, you know, that's where you could gain space to communicate with people, and that's where people went. But today, you know, you take the young generation, they don't subscribe to newspapers, they got their smartphone, everything they do is on a smartphone, maybe an iPad, but that's it. Mm-hmm. So if you're not doing those things, you don't connect with those individuals, and that's a bigger and bigger part of the population. So you have to be able to do that, and you have to find ways to communicate, Chris, I think at a couple of different levels. You have to be able to communicate at the very visceral level, so that somebody can, in a 140 characters, can kind of gather what you think's happening, what needs to happen. Or if they want to, you know, you can take that tweet, you can have them drill down by going to your Facebook page or by going to a website. Although websites are really antiquated, as far as because you try to put so much information there, it's hard to keep them up to date. You know, the flow of information that happens on Facebook is a much better way to do that. But again, you know, pushing information out there and doing it in steps. You know, understanding that there's a group of people that want to be communicated with in 140 characters or less. That's great. Now you can put links in there, so you're not limited necessarily by 140 characters. So you can do the 140 character piece that gets their attention. And if they want more, they follow that link to Facebook or to a piece that you put out, whatever it may be, YouTube clip. So I think that's really the way that you get at this communication realm today, and where you can be most effective.
Okay, great. Do you think social media has played a role at all in the recent gridlock in Congress?
I don't think it does. I still think members ultimately are in control about what they do or what they don't do. I think that external groups try to influence via social media. And in many instances, they can be effective because they can generate enough interest externally where those individuals then contact offices, post on Facebook, send emails, and they can ramp that up to a significant magnitude for a member to say, oh gosh, I better be looking at this because I've gotten a bunch of feedback on this. So I do think that things can be driven externally. I don't know that that in and of itself creates the division. I think just because of where we are today, and that the parties have gone in some different philosophical directions, and it's really just a division in the country about how people feel on a fundamental issue about the role of government. Some people want more government, think the government can be effective in addressing the challenges society has, and others don't. So I think that's one of those fundamental philosophical differences that, when times are good, the sides come closer. When times are not so good, like we've been right now, they're not. And I think economics and people's sense of well-being drive that. So it's much more individual and personalized to people outside of a social media realm. Although social media can let somebody communicate with that and express their frustration or their ideas or what they like or don't like about one party or the other. But it is not in and of itself the cause of the division.
Right. Great. The only other question I had quickly was, there's, I don't know if you heard of the new theory floating around called slacktivism, where it's the thought where in the past, if you were going to help the United Way, you would give your time and money and feel like you've done something. Now you like their Facebook page and walk away and you still feel like you've done something. Do you feel like there's any of that going on up here as far as when people reach out to the office with a quick tweet as opposed to taking time to write a letter or coming by? Is there levels of urgency that you place on those differences, or is it all the same?
Well, I think it's understanding those differences. You have to be able to glean information from all of those, and there are people, as I've said, that that's how they communicate, 140 characters, and that's their world. But you have to be able to be perceptive enough to say, okay, I'm going to pick up that information from those folks, but I'm also going to pick up the information from folks that are willing to put a Facebook post up there, or those that are willing to send us an email, or send us what we rarely get these days, and that's a snail mail letter.
Right.
So you have to be able to discern information from all of those different sources, and people do believe that they are interacting with you on a high level through those different social media. So, folks that tweet you feel that they have given you a tremendous amount of valuable information for you to use in your decision making through 140 characters. And doing it the right way, there is a lot of good information that can be gained from that. Done not so well, it's lacking many times the substance that you need to say, okay, well, what's the alternative, or what is it that you don't like about that, or this is only a partial perspective on what we need to be doing. So I think that, putting in perspective, those individuals, do feel that they are impacting, or that their comments should be impacting your decision making. So that idea of slacktivism, I think, is in many people's minds their way to say, hey, I sent you a tweet, that's my input. You ought to be able to discern all you need to from that to understand what I want you to do.
It's the new normal.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Yeah, minimalistic communication.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you.
Sure.
This is great. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.